I am very oppressed by the current structure of society.
I think that there is a clear application on how blockchain can help.
You own your identity. It can't be taken away from you.
It's almost like they're too big to be competed against.
It has increasing marginal costs with popularity.
Buying it as a reserve asset and hoping that it develops into a currency.
I don't want to vote on how McDonald's is run.
You need to be surrounded by people like that who can get anything done. Jeremy, I've been looking forward to this podcast interview for quite some time now, so I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today.
It's great to be here.
You've got a lot of work that you're doing in blockchain, and you've got some very interesting, honestly, insights into how the technology can be used, where money's going, all these different things that I want to touch on in this conversation. But just to start, so the work that you guys are doing at LBRY is obviously heavily blockchain focused. And I was wondering what first introduced you to blockchain and what got you interested in it, and how do you view blockchain in regards to problems outside of just money?
That's a great question. So I was lucky to discover blockchain pretty early through Bitcoin, was just generally curious about it. I came at it from a computer science approach, not from a money approach, although I've always liked economics. And from a computer science perspective, a blockchain is a database. And what's different about it is that it's a database that doesn't require a central authority to reach consensus on what's in it. And this is a really powerful idea. This is the property that should make us excited and interested in blockchain. And in fact, from a computer science perspective, we have to give up a lot to get that property. And so I think this is the thing that we should be thinking about is what can we do with this property? Why is it beneficial? When is it better than what's come before? It's not universal. I don't like these blockchain people who are like, oh, let's blockchain everything. It's like, it costs you a lot. It costs you, it's more expensive database. It's a slower database. It's harder to make changes, right? We see how difficult it is, for example, for Bitcoin, which I'm a fan of, to evolve. All right. These are all a cost. So I think that you want to ask, what can this do? And one of the really interesting areas for me was publishing. We can, with a blockchain, have a shared record of information. This will date me, but it's sort of a card catalog or a listing of everything that exists that's not owned or controlled by any one person. And I once I got onto that idea, I couldn't stop thinking about it.
And what you're doing right now with LBRY, can you talk a little bit about how you've applied this database technology to what you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at the sort of state of existing decentralized technology for sharing information, which would be generally peer-to-peer, it's pretty censorship resistant as is. Its bigger problems are around things like legitimacy, discovery, that is like finding what's on the network, payment, they don't have payment mechanisms. And when I say discovery, I mean finding what's on it, which generally results in a poor user experience. And so what we tried to do with the creation of LBRY was sort of get the best of both worlds, where you have this censorship resistance, this lack of one party controlling it, which comes with all the downsides that we've seen with big tech currently, but without some of the downsides of previous peer-to-peer technology, where, as beautiful as it was in some aspects, really never worked for legitimate content creators.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that, I mean, you'll hear a lot of people talking about blockchain and ways in which you can apply blockchain to real world problems. And just like you mentioned, there are many times where it's like, why are you trying to toss a blockchain on this? But I mean, in this particular realm of what you're talking about, I think that there is a clear application on how blockchain can help. So if we dig into that and start thinking about, okay, well, how can we start giving people control over their data, privacy, and not have something all controlled by big tech giants? How is it that you're looking at and trying to solve that problem?
I will answer that question. I want to also say this isn't a theoretical project. LBRY has more than 1 million identities on the network. It has more than, I think we're at like something like 15 million pieces of content published by really big creators. And the most popular way to access the LBRY network is through a website called Oddysee.com, Odyse.com. I assume this show will be on there at some point. You can go on there, you can look at the homepage. Really, really popular content creators, lots of names that you would know. This is not a project that's purely aspirational. This is a project that's getting it done in the real world. But your question was basically like, how are we doing it? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And we do that by taking a public proof of work blockchain, allowing users of that blockchain to create an identity on that blockchain, and then allowing those identities to publish metadata about their content that's signed by those signatures. By the way, this is like a technical audience, right? If I'm talking too nerdy, I can give the ABC News explanations. But
No, I think
your
it's
audience can
relevant.
handle it.
And actually, after we dive into this, I also want to hear how like creators can go and upload onto Odyssey.
It's very easy. Now, for your hardcore users, like the people who are like, not my keys, not my wallet, there's LBRY Desktop, which is a purely decentralized way of using it.
Mhm.
Odyssey is a half centralized, half decentralized, in the sense that it interacts with the decentralized, and you can exit. You can download your wallet and exit. And Odyssey has a tool for YouTube creators that's like one click, sync all your content on an ongoing basis. So it's very easy to get on. And I think this is very big when you're trying to compete with the big tech giants. You can't make it hard for people to try something new. You've got to make it very low cost for them. That has been a big driver of our success, is recognizing that and acting accordingly. But we've really built a product it's one of the most used, if not the most used, Web3 apps out there. It's very user friendly, and it's solving a real problem, as we've all seen. The problem that YouTube and the big tech companies, and it's not. I mean, certainly, if privacy is a concern for you, we meet that. Realistically, I think maybe 1% of people are concerned about privacy. I like those people. I'm not trying to dig that. I'm just saying you're not going to get to 1 billion users on privacy. You can get to 1 billion users on things like, hey, why are you letting these companies make choices for you? Why are you letting these companies exploit you? These are things that apply to basically every user of these platforms.
Yeah, and so I guess a couple questions there. So it seems great that it's really easy to upload and sync everything. After the show, I'm gonna go and make sure that we do that. But aside from that, when you're talking about the benefits to the creators, what are those key benefits? One is obviously privacy, and then what are some of the other things that you think are going to incentivize creators or anyone who's publishing to go and publish through Odyssey?
There's so many. One of the biggest ones is control. You have much more control. The rules can't change on you without your permission. Another one is sort of trust and ownership. I guess that's related in the sense that these bad things can't happen to you. You own your identity. It can't be taken away from you.
And just real quick, by control, do you mean that you just can't, it can't be taken down? Like if YouTube or someone there decides to take your channel down, that's something that can't happen on Odyssey?
On LBRY. So Odyssey, So, and this just, I know it's going to get tough because we go back and forth, but basically think of LBRY as like Bitcoin. So there's this underlying network. You can access it in a directly peer-to-peer fashion. And when you're using it that way, there's no ability to interfere. Think of Odyssey as like Coinbase. It makes it way easier for normal people to interact with this network, but Odyssey is a website, and Odyssey has to follow the same legal rules and so on. So, Odyssey, if you're using Odyssey, Odyssey does have control over your account in the same way that Coinbase has control over your account. So if the federal government or whoever your adversary in your adversarial model is threatening you, they can go to Coinbase and they can get your Bitcoin, right? So same, if you are maximally concerned about these types of scenarios, you want to be a LBRY Desktop user, we have FAQ articles. You can Google how to publish anonymously on LBRY and do things that full way. For people who aren't concerned about that, but who want some of the upside, who like the fact that, things like the ability to exit, the open source nature. Even on Odyssey, there are lots of things that are way better than the status quo because of the underlying LBRY tech, because it's open source, et cetera. And for these people, for sort of most people are going to want Odyssey, but certainly some people, I use LBRY Desktop. I'm a nerd. I'm on Linux right now. I'm one of these people, but I think also a lot of times people that are into this tech have to recognize that these preferences are minority preferences. And I think this is what's frequently held back things like Linux or Mastodon and all technology that I support, is like they've built it for themselves and they haven't made the necessary, at times, what I would even call compromises from my ideals to reach the mainstream. And so we've tried to really satisfy both camps by having the pure decentralized all control version and the sort of, it is a little bit watered down, but it comes with more usability. You can have, you can reset your password, things like this that, like, look, I don't know if you notice, normal people forget passwords. It happens all the time.
They don't have password managers.
I
don't know how they live their lives without password managers.
I haven't forgotten a password in more than a decade since I got on the password manager system.
I haven't known a password in like over a decade.
So, but this is, I think that, like, look, and I'm not trying to be down on people that are like, not your keys, not your wallet. I agree with you. That is a true principle. Most people are not, or at least a lot of people, I mean, most, we don't can debate how many, like, are not in a position to never forget their password. That's not the way they live their lives technologically. And so if you want to be, if you want to bridge all the way to the mainstream, you have to some extent, meet people where they are. And I think that we have been very willing to do that. And that explains a lot of our success.
Yeah. So in going into how the algorithm works, for example, when you go on YouTube or anywhere else, they have recommended videos for you. Is that type of a mechanism at play when people are using LBRY?
Yes. So personal recommendations are still in the works. We do have various sort of trending and selection algorithms that are computed based off of a variety of factors. It's difficult to explain these succinctly just because it does include so many factors. However, in our case, the way that we do it is open source. So while I can't in 10 seconds explain it to you precisely, just because it's not that simple of an algorithm, I can say for people who want to know, it's open source. You can dig into it. You can understand it. We have no ability, and this is a big thing. We can't put our thumb on the scale without people being able to know that and inspect the fact that we've done that. It's one of the most disgusting things that YouTube has done. I actually think that sort of quote shadow banning or de-weighting or whatever you want to call it, in a way, it can be worse than getting banned, because when you're banned, there are creators on YouTube for whom, if you type the names of their videos into the search bar, the exact terms, they're not there till the second or third page. And these are videos with millions of views. And the reason is that YouTube has put a large negative weight on these creators. And this is not a conspiracy theory. There was actually a couple of years ago, Google was accidentally leaking the weights in their API responses. So for a couple of days, you could see in the API responses, the channel weights that each channel was given by the YouTube algorithm. And in many cases, these were manually assigned scores. So these were employees at YouTube who were tasked with saying, this channel ought to be higher and this channel ought to be lower. And YouTube explicitly says this, that they quote, boost authoritative sources. I mean, YouTube has become very paternalistic. They think it's their job. Google does generally, thinks that it's their job to determine what's true or not and serve these things for you. And what's especially dangerous about this is a company that is very politically homogenous, where there's not much political diversity at these companies. And so you've got people who are, and I'm not even necessarily, like we can debate, I don't want to make this a debate about ideologies, but like people disagree about things. And the more ideological something gets, generally the less logical people are about truth. And so you've got a very, very strong ideological capture at these companies. And these are people who think they're in the position to decide what's true for you or not. This is very dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, it gets down to at its core, an ethical conversation. Going back to just the algorithm piece, I mean, right there, it's great that you're putting that as open source, because I mean, there are people that really enjoy that, they're getting served videos that are down what they're interested in, and they appreciate that. But I think one of those big pieces to it that rubs people the wrong way is that they don't know why it's being served, how it's being served, and that their views are being crafted without them knowing. And it's being crafted by an algorithm that they don't understand how it works. So I think that's a very good middle ground where you can still get people what they want, but if they want to understand what's driving that algorithm, they can go check it out because it is open source.
Yep, absolutely. And exit rights to me are really the key in protecting abuses. The less exit rights a user has in a system, generally the more it gets corrupted over time. And so exit rights, I mean, the ability to leave while still interacting. And I sometimes struggle with this analogy because I do think on one hand, like email has kind of failed to evolve due to lack of ownership. And this is why we're moving more and more away from email. At the same time, exit rights on email have made it so that our email services are generally much less corrupted than other big tech. Like even at Google, Gmail is by far their less corrupt product. They're happy to tamper with search results and remove popular websites that they don't like, but they don't go so far as to mess with your emails. And I think that's because it's way easier to get out of Gmail than it is to get out of something of YouTube. So.
Yeah, no one's going to be switching from Google to Bing or anything like that.
More and more people, I mean, DuckDuckGo, I found myself actually, for many years, I was like, the results just aren't as good. But more and more, I found like, I know I'm looking for something and Google buries it because they think it's too controversial. I saw on Twitter the other day, maybe a couple of weeks ago at this point, there was a Google engineer and he was on the Google's trust and safety team. And he was bragging about how like they've got like 15 to 20% of websites or something like this in this like dangerous misinformation category. And he's like, we're burying them. People won't find them anymore. And he was just openly bragging about it. And it's like, I'm like, dude, like if the website is popular and people are clicking on it and it matches the terms, like let me judge for myself whether it's true or not. I'm not even saying that he's wrong. Like I'm not a conspiracy theorist type of person. If you are, that's fine. Because again, to each their own, find your own truth. I'm not that way, but like, I don't want it hidden from me and my ability to access it. And they were bragging about it like they should be proud of it. And so that's really the ideology there is they have this authoritarian nature where they want to decide for you. And, DuckDuckGo just isn't that way. And so I've been using it more and more.
Yeah, I actually recently made the switch from Chrome to the Brave browser. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Brave right now. I switched. Yeah, I would say maybe 1 or 2 years ago, but yeah, it's pretty easy switch actually. It's one of the more seamless switches I've made.
The layout is almost identical to Chrome. I mean, I started using it and then afterwards I didn't even realize that I was off of Chrome, but honestly has gotten so much better because I used it, I think something like 3 years ago, like a while ago when it was still a little bit earlier and it was slower than Chrome at that point. But now I think it's even better.
Yeah. And, I used to be such a big fan of Google. Like a decade ago, I genuinely was a fan. And whether it was when they switched their slogan or maybe James Damore, but there was some kind of tipping point where they really became the bad guy. And it's kind of sad to see the company fall in that way because I think they have a lot of very talented people there. We even had, I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but there are disaffected engineers within Google. By the way, if you're one of them, please contact me. But we have some that are now contributing to our team. I mean, literally ex-YouTube guys who were so frustrated by what happened there, who bringing that knowledge over to us because they're like, we don't agree with the things that this company is doing.
Yeah. Well, going back to how, like where you guys are today and where you guys are going, can you talk a little bit about, I know you talked about the progress you guys have had up until this point, but what have been some of the big focuses for you guys as a company right now?
Yeah. So LBRY and Oddysee actually split their corporate structure. So Oddysee is currently a subsidiary of LBRY, but it's being run independently, has a separate CEO, and 2/3 of the former staff at LBRY are now at Oddysee. So Oddysee has been tasked to go full speed ahead, make the most popular consumer social video, whatever you want to call it, that you can. It will always be backed by LBRY Web3 tech. It's always going to have that aspect of owning your channel and all this stuff. But Oddysee is going to go full steam ahead. If Oddysee needs to break the rules a little bit, like streaming, for example, which Oddysee does and is popular there, is not part of the LBRY protocol yet. Oddysee can go ahead and add it, and LBRY can catch up later because we don't want to be held back in a product that a lot of people want. LBRY is now purely focused on the tech. It is no longer directly marketing products to end users. It's marketing its technology to developers and other engineers. So there's kind of two separate focuses. LBRY is focused on now, third-party apps. It's doing some rewrites of code for scalability, sustainability, decentralization. It's a pure tech company that's managing an open source product that's expected to have a long lifetime. And LBRY is also taking stakes in various companies that are building up other apps. So we're going to see a news app come out. We're going to see an audio focused app come out. We're going to see a CAD file sharing app come out. And so that way the LBRY ecosystem of apps can become even more diverse.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see because a lot of times with these big companies, it's almost like they're too big to be competed against. So it's interesting to see how you're going up and you're trying to figure out a way to get into that field.
Yeah, I think there's a field for big companies where it can feel that way. But if you look at history, like big companies also always fail. Like, I mean, the largest oil companies failed, Sears failed, these kinds of things. Large companies, they become, as you get more and more structure and hierarchy, which is necessary as you get larger and larger, it becomes harder to move fast. The most creative and innovative people tend to not want to work at companies like that because you're not able to capture as much value of your own work as if you go and work somewhere else. You see ideological capture, you see them become sclerotic, so you see them unable to adapt to changes. This would be a great example to paradigm shifts, right? I'm not always there's a classic Malcolm Gladwell story about this, however you feel about the man. I can't do it off the top of my head, but about, skunk, this whole idea of like why large companies need skunk works. If a large company doesn't have a skunk works type thing, that's their way to attempt to stop this from happening, because they recognize that that's the nature of large companies. And I think what we're seeing with Web3 is exactly this kind of upheaval, where this is a new technology that's disruptive to the Web2 status quo, that is threatening to all the ways that they do things. And for that exact reason, it's challenging for them to adopt it. Because for Google to adapt Web3 is to surrender a lot of what has brought them to success, because their entire model is capture the market, turn the monetization dial, and essentially exploit you. And Web3 says, we're making exploitation impossible up front. Well, why would they ever adopt that? They're never going to. It's self-defeating. And so, I think this is an example of the kind of paradigm where large companies can get beaten.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the classic incumbent versus startup, where the startup doesn't really have all the baggage that the incumbent comes with. And I mean, this is such a disruptive technology that really the only way that you really can compete with a lot of these big companies is to leverage this technology with decentralization. And I mean, I guess we touched on Brave as another example of a company that is taking them on from a browser perspective.
Yeah. And the key is you've got to do something different. And this is why you've got to look for what I call successor tech rather than alternative tech. Alternative tech is a clone. And I think alternative tech is generally not likely to win. But successor tech that does something in a genuinely different way from what's come before, this is how you can beat a large incumbent.
Yeah.
Also, I will add, way that does something different that's difficult for them to copy. That's the second level of that. Because the other thing that you'll see that plays out is some startup will do something genuinely different, but in a way that the incumbent can adopt. And then you see, well, the incumbent, it may be slow, but the incumbent always has a lot of time. So even if it moves slowly, if it's something that they can adopt or co-opt, then they'll do it. So it's got to be that you're coming at them at an angle that it's something that sort of for some reason they won't adopt it.
Yeah. And I mean, are there any other types of applications where you see like that type of an opportunity where it's that big of a disruptive technology that they won't go and adopt it?
So, I mean, this is outside of the, I guess, traditional big tech space, but certainly one of the areas that I'm the most interested in is futures markets or betting markets. I think this is a field that has very positive externalities for society generally. Like, we can get way better information about how severe is global warming or how severe is climate change if we were allowed people to take financial positions based off of how they think that will actually happen. When people put money where their mouth is, I think they are far more truthful. I mean, COVID, it would have been great to have prediction markets around. I think we would have had way better information about the severity of various things. It creates a financial incentive to be correct. And this is something that is illegal in the United States to do. And it is now being done via blockchain. And so I think looking for areas like this, where there's the cute startup term for it is regulatory arbitrage. I think this is a great area to be looking if you're interested in blockchain. And this is, of course, by the way, Bitcoin is here. I mean, Bitcoin is genuinely different from what's come before. But if you said to like that JP Morgan would allow anyone to create anonymous cash bank accounts and allow funds to be moved between those accounts via password, that would be a very popular service. That is not a service that's legal to build. And that service is essentially what Bitcoin is.
Yeah. Oh, I actually would love to dive into Bitcoin with you if you'll join me on this. So I guess just to start, when did you first hear about Bitcoin, and what's been your journey down the rabbit hole as you've been learning about it?
I first heard about Bitcoin in late 2013. At least that was the first time I searched my email. So that's the first chat record and so on of me talking about it. Because I even have back when people used GChat in the early 2010s. So that's the first known record. So it was around that time. I mean, I found it more of a curiosity. I mean, I can't say I was this guy who was like immediate all in on Bitcoin, but I found it very interesting and I started paying attention to it and I started to continue to read news about it. And honestly, even then it took a year or two from learning about it to saying, well, what if we took Bitcoin and used its properties in this way for digital content publishing? Yeah. So that's sort of like my personal early history with Bitcoin. I mean, I both love Bitcoin and am disappointed in Bitcoin, because to me, the excitement about Bitcoin is fixing problems with government controlled currency, moving to a world that's much closer to free banking, which I'm a big proponent of and think would be better. It would be a healthier economic system. I think the fact that, we have a group of people, inflation is a tax on everyone. They're allowed to do it without permission. And also, again, we see both legal and even almost extra legal usage by government officials to shut down industries that they don't like. Operation Choke Point is a great example of this, where like they basically you leverage the credit card companies to shut down businesses that they don't like. We still see the credit card companies shut down businesses that they don't like for social reasons, things that are legal. I mean, we're talking about things like selling ammo, selling drug paraphernalia, right? That's legal, but that's legally questionable. And I mean, even me, like I had my bank account shut down for completely
Really?
legal activities. Yeah, this was years ago. TD Bank, screw you. But also to excuse TD Bank for a second, like, because I'm in this position now as a creator, the government asks private businesses to be enforcers of the law. And then they say, private businesses, if you didn't do a good job enforcing these laws on our behalf, then you broke the law. And so it's a very awkward position. Like, so private businesses are put in this position of wanting to create this record of enforcement actions so that when a government regulator comes knocking, you can go to the regulator and say, look, we tried. Look, we were doing our best. Look at all these people that we stopped. So yeah, that guy was doing illegal cryptocurrency transactions and he managed to slip through, but it's not like we weren't trying. And by the way, I was doing nothing illegal, but this is the position that these private businesses are put in. And so to me, this is the promise of Bitcoin, is that it's supposed to be able to fix some of these things. And fortunately or unfortunately, it's become much more focused on just, store of value type kind of thing. And it's like, no, man, I don't want to use my credit card online. I want to pay in cryptocurrency, because that's the real promise, is that we can escape these corrupt kind of systems. And it hasn't delivered to this degree that I thought it would have. We're talking about 8 years ago. 8 years ago, I'm like, I'm going to be paying in Bitcoin. Like, well, I'm still not really paying in Bitcoin, most of the time. I'm still very excited about the technology, but that's a bit of a disappointment.
Yeah. Wow. So you must have been quite the futurist 8 years ago already, seeing where Bitcoin was going.
Oh, well, maybe I'm
because what you're talking about right now is still like on the horizon, and so
I might be making things up. I can't say for sure that in 2013 I was thinking all of these things, but certainly at some point along the journey from discovering Bitcoin, I started thinking about those. So I can't pinpoint. I don't even know what Operation Checkpoint hadn't even happened by 2013. So I'm talking about something that I certainly couldn't have been thinking about in 2013. But this is, to me, this is the promise, and this is what I want to see it delivering on, is these things that ought to be legal or literally are legal but are stopped by private actors regardless. This is what I want cryptocurrency to be fixing. And I think a lot of people are like, I want to buy something, ignore it, and make money. And they're like, I'm sorry, that's a stupid way to make money. Like, the Buffett and Munger criticisms of cryptocurrency are not entirely wrong. And I buy and hold Bitcoin, so I'm not saying that they're right either. But like, investments are generally in productive activities. Okay, like that's what investments are. Currencies are not generally investments. That is a correct criticism of the cryptocurrency industry, right? Now, so you can say, well, this is an exception, but like, if we want it to be an exception, then we need to deliver on the real promise of the technology, because that's what will actually make it an exception.
So when you're viewing Bitcoin in terms of, are you viewing it more as like a reserve asset or a currency, or like neither camp?
I'm buying it as a reserve asset, but want it to be a currency.
Okay, that's a good answer. That aligns with everything you said. Yeah, buying it as a reserve asset and hoping that it develops into a currency. And so, I mean, those types of applications. What do you think of like what the Lightning Network's doing and everything there? Do you think that that's still in the cards or on the horizon?
I cheer on all of it. I've seen some criticisms of Lightning that seem to have some merit, but I've also seen debunkings of those criticisms that seem to have some merit. So I haven't gone through it all to form a conclusive opinion. But I think that, like, this is the problem. Okay, if we can't allow Bitcoin, if Bitcoin can't work for, it doesn't have to necessarily be cup of coffee size, but like, if we can't buy things for like $50 with Bitcoin online, then like, okay, who's solving this problem? Because that's what I want. That's what I care about. And by the way, of course, as I'm saying that, there's a bunch of listeners who are like, I know the cryptocurrency that solves that problem. And so I'm not saying that there people aren't, but then you get back into that same conversation we were having earlier about Bitcoin is now the incumbent, right? So now we were going to see the same dynamic play out. Well, Bitcoin's got all the mind share. Bitcoin's got all the adoption. If some other coin is solving these problems, there's a question of, will that be enough to unseat Bitcoin? Or if they actually solve the problems, will Bitcoin simply evolve to do those things? And I don't know how all that plays out, but certainly that's what I think everyone who cares about cryptocurrency needs to be cheering on, is getting it to the point that it is widespread and usable so that it can compete with credit cards for online transactions. That is the world that I want.
Yeah. And there's this whole big discussion between, like, you have the Bitcoin maximalists, or people who like believe in a future where Bitcoin dominates everything. You have the people who believe it's Bitcoin and then a handful of other blockchains. And then you have others who really believe that there are going to be loads of different blockchains as well as Bitcoin, all, coexisting. So my question to you is, as everything continues to mature, how do you see these other blockchains outside of, the big cap like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all those? How do you see smaller blockchains continuing to evolve in that type of a world?
Well, LBRY is its own blockchain, so I'm kind of obviously going to not express the pure maximalist perspective. I think there's sort of two sub flavors of maximalism, one of which is literally insane and one of which is somewhat defensible. So the insane one is that everything will be done on Bitcoin, and that's just insane, right? Bitcoin has already kind of said that it's going to be going towards small blocks, maximal security, and it's just not feasible, especially if you're talking about there being blockchain versions of everything. It's just completely infeasible. I mean, I'm skeptical of even the Ethereum version of this. Potentially they'll be able to do it with sharding, but like Bitcoin literally has, and all blockchains have, one of the worst properties that you want to see as a startup person, which is it has increasing marginal costs with popularity, right? The more popular it is, the more expensive it is to use. That is the opposite of what you want in any successful endeavor, right? And this is a really big question that we need to be answering. I think this shifts, this therefore means that you will see blockchains more tailor-made for specific use cases. They can be more efficient. They can be more designed for doing specific things. And then, interoperability can later be added, or interoperability can just happen at the layer above it. Pure blockchain to blockchain interoperability doesn't even necessarily need to be there. You can have a level above that provides the interoperability. Although certainly ways of doing it blockchain to blockchain are interesting. Now there's a flavor of Bitcoin maximalism that says, well, one blockchain is going to win the market for sort of store of value reserve aspects. I find this to be a defensible position. I'm not convinced that it's correct, but it's possibly correct. And I think it's correct enough that I buy Bitcoin because of it, right? From an expected value perspective, like, it's plausibly correct. And if it's correct, then Bitcoin will be very valuable. And so I think it makes sense to at least have some Bitcoin because it's possibly correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that I fall into more of that camp as well, where I don't think it's just going to be only Bitcoin. I think that there are obviously other applications for blockchain, but it's all speculation, I guess.
Yeah, like we're not competing with Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin's not a competitor to us at all. Yeah. We're trying to build a blockchain that takes the properties of a public blockchain and uses it to store metadata about content and identities about publishers. Bitcoin can't remotely do what our blockchain is doing. If we had done it on Ethereum, it would have been an incredibly expensive nightmare and not worked, right? And so it's really hard to argue that we would have achieved the success that we've had doing it in any other way other than having our own chain. And so it's like, the only reason to expect that something like LBRY, like, there's no reason to expect we're going to get out. Like, no one's close to us. None of these other blockchain ones are close to us in popularity, et cetera. And whenever we survey it, like, there's nothing that we could switch to that would have the same properties. This is this is going to kind of like nuanced and technical, but like, a lot of these people who believe in the promise of all of these like smart contract platforms, or like these coins where it's like, you can do anything on this. Actually, you can't. Like, when you dig into the reality of what it would be like to, because we've done it and I've looked at them, and like, no, you can't. You can't actually do what these people are saying, because when you dig into what you actually need to do to build a web app that can compete with Web 2 apps, like a smart contract, at least a smart contract in terms of, when I say smart contract, it's a contract that can execute, on chain and resolve itself. That's not sufficient to build what we've been trying to build, as an example.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see how this technology is getting applied in many different ways. I mean, you can look at someone like Jack Dorsey, right? Someone who is running was at the top of the game with Square, and all of a sudden, like, making some of the changes that he did, even changing that name from Square to Block, and everything he's been talking about with applications of Lightning, funding developers. It's pretty clear that he's looking at the puck going in this direction towards decentralization. And I think he's more so focused on Bitcoin, but there are a lot of people that are looking at this technology, figuring out ways to apply it.
Yeah, I think Jack, by his position actually of being Twitter CEO more than anything else, was forced to deal with the government, forced to deal with the United States federal government in a way that like let him really see how it operates. And that actually really increased his skepticism of it.
Mhm.
And I think that his opinions and perspectives have changed. And I think that's part of why he's gotten so big about Bitcoin. I think he resents the position that he was put in. And I'm not a 100% fan of Jack, I'll say this, but like, I think he resents the position that he was put in by being the CEO of Twitter, and resents the position that he was put in by his users, his employees, and the government. I think he resents all of them to some degree for putting him in the position that he was put in. And I don't necessarily defend the decisions that he's made, but it's when he was put in some of those positions. But I think it is clear that like it has woke him up to some of these realities. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating to think about. And so, I mean, like tying this all back to, I guess, the mission that you're working on with Oddysee and LBRY. I mean, what's the core of where you want this to go? Let's say you have a magic wand, you wave it, and all your wishes come true. What does that type of a world look like?
So I want Oddysee to destroy YouTube. I want Oddysee to become the predominant way that people create and share social video online, or even more than social video. It's not like YouTube is just social video anymore. And then I want LBRY to kind of become the atom of publishing identity, or really potentially all of online identity. I don't want to get too ambitious. We'll see how some of these things play out. But we have now more identities than most of these so-called decentralized identity systems. And unlike these decentralized identity systems where people are buying them because stuff is going to be built later, we'll see, ours are actually being used. And so, this idea of owning an identity online that's portable between services, so that I can be the same handle and the same person in different places, and pseudonymous, so you can have multiple handles if you need them, or also non-pseudonymous. We also are working on ways that you can, quote, prove, that's a complicated question, but assert proof, provide proof, maybe conclusive proof of who someone is arguably unprovable, but, assert proof. So I'm interested, I've been getting more and more interested in this direction. And this means, how can we improve portability so that you can take your identity into other apps as more and more apps are being created, this kind of thing. So that's where I'm kind of pushing with LBRY, and Oddysee is pushing to just win this market as a competitor with social video. And the CEO of Oddysee is doing a tremendous job. Truthfully, he did better job growing Oddysee than I did, because I've always been a bit more, I'm practical, but I'm also theoretical. And, he just was obsessed about making Oddysee successful. And I was like, dude, you're doing a better job than I am. So that's part of the reason he's in charge now.
Sounds good. Yeah. You need to be surrounded by people like that who can get anything done.
Yeah.
Sounds like you found him. All right. Well, I got one final question for you. The last question is, what is one belief that you hold to be true that the majority of people would disagree with you about?
I've got like 1,000, but
yeah, I was going to say what we can do here is with you, I want to do like a couple. So
I'm not, and I want to say like, I'm not reflexively contrarian. I have because I found myself in somewhat contrarian circles at times, but there's plenty of beliefs that I have are very mainstream about medicine or technology. One that I will say that I guess is like probably I'll say the one that's unpopular that I also think is the most important. And that is that the biggest problem, I'd say it's the biggest, it's certainly one of the biggest, is competitive governance. I'm very skeptical of democracy generally. Like I believe that competitive governance would create better government. And so when I say competitive governance, I mean something like restaurants, right? I have no say what's on the menu, but I have complete authority over where I choose to eat. I don't want to vote on how McDonald's is run, but they make a very good breakfast sandwich. All right. And that's right. I eat McDonald's sometimes. I'm not ashamed of it. So like, this kind of idea, you pretend I said a restaurant you like if you don't like McDonald's, but this, I think I would like this. I think, and it's the same property I apply to my work. I think exit rights are the biggest missing problem in society. We have governments, colluding to stop new and interesting things from happening. And we should allow people who want to take their own skin in the game, who want to say, hey, we want to try living a different way. We're not trying to force it on you. Give us a couple square miles somewhere, whatever, we'll pay for the land, and allow people to try other things. democracy was once an innovation. And I think it's reasonable to believe that democracy may be better than what came before, but we shouldn't conclude that we've sort of solved the problems of how government should work. And if we allow people to experiment with new ideas, it's possible that they would hit on something new, and then we can copy them. I was actually listening to the Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan episode this morning, and he wasn't talking about competitive governance, but he was talking about how creative people are kind of crazy, but that society needs them because, society is not stable. And if you don't allow people to experiment with new things, like your society will fail in new situations or will get outcompeted by other societies. And he says that like the best thing to do with creative people is to let them go off and do their crazy ideas. And most of them will fail. But if they happen to work, then more, less creative or normal or more stable society can copy them. And that's what we want with government, right? That's actually what happened. The United States was once the crazy society that was like, we're going to let people vote. And the rest of Europe was like, you're insane. And then 50 years later, all of Europe, I don't know my history that well, but, some amount of years later, the rest of Europe became democratic, right? Probably took more than 50 years in many cases. I guess you're talking about a couple hundred years for some of the countries. But same kind of idea. And so this is, I think, if you ask me, I'm more concerned about this problem than climate change, than COVID, than anything, any of these other problems that people are especially concerned about. So that's probably my most unpopular idea, is that we need, that there might be things better than democracy, and that we need to allow people to experiment with alternative government.
It's almost like a free market competition, but instead of with companies, you're allowing the innovators to go and try their own forms of governance and then see which ones are the ones that people prefer. It's like the ideas from the sovereign individual too. I mean, how do you see something like that playing out over the next like 10 years, 20 years, or starting to unfold?
I haven't read that book specifically, but I can guess that I'm probably familiar with the ideas in it loosely. And I think that's like, I can understand why people take that path, and I wouldn't begrudge people that do. But I think that's a solution that doesn't work for the vast majority of people. And I think that it doesn't solve anything in the broader sense. So I can't blame anyone from a self-interested perspective for going down that path. It might be the best choice for you. But as someone who kind of has that engineering, tinkering mindset, I'm like, but I want to fix it, right? I don't want to, it's insufficient for me.
Yeah. So that's an incredible answer. I want to get one more belief that you hold to be true that the majority of people would disagree with you about.
Majority of people would disagree. This isn't going to surprise anyone from who's heard me talking, but like I I have my ethical philosophy is like basically like libertarian ethics or voluntarist ethics, so I do believe that like I am this maybe this is too close to my last answer, but I mean I effectively do believe that I am very oppressed by the current structure of society. I don't consent to it. I would like to exit. I would leave. I would spend my money. I'd be happy to start with nothing, somewhere in the middle of the woods. I'm not asking for you to defend me, and I'm sure I could get some people to come with me, whatever. So like, I do feel that like I am, that the current structure of society, because I don't consent to it, is oppressive. That's too close to the last one. I don't got any other spicy takes. So why don't, that's the only other one I'm going to give you. We'll save it for the interview number 2. I'll give you something spicy.
All right, perfect. Well, Jeremy, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. I think that the work that you're doing is incredible, and I'm wishing you all the best with the continued growth of the company.
Thank you so much. If you like this, please create an account on Oddysee.com. If you don't have one, if you're the power user, go to LBRY.com, get the desktop app. And if you liked what I had to say, you can follow me on Twitter at Jeremy Kauffman, or on LBRY itself at KAUFFJ. Thanks.
Perfect. And to do the upload, what was the URL to go and?
It's both in the sign up process, or if you've already created your account, it's under the upload menu. It just says like sync YouTube channel.
Perfect. Yeah, I got to make sure I go and do that.